Yeah. Okay. A related issue to all this is what's called tragedy of the commons. All right? Or it's a common property resource. We sometimes use that phrase, common property resource. The tragedy of the commons. Tuna. Who owns the tuna? Well, the answer is, again, whoever catches it owns it. So if we go out into the sea and we hunt for tuna, on average, tuna that get caught these days are much smaller than tuna that got caught 100 years ago. Okay? And that's because we're out there fishing all these tuna and we've overfished them. We've fished them so many, they don't get as old as they used to, so they don't get as big. All right? Cape Cod used to be full of cod, no cod. All those rivers in New England used to have salmon in them, no salmon. Whenever there's a resource that everybody can claim, so everybody who lives in New England can claim the salmon that's in the rivers up there, what are they going to do? Well, everybody's going to feel free to take all the salmon that they want, and pretty soon there's not going to be any salmon. Okay? There is a great fear in the world that fish like tuna and salmon are going to go away in the ocean. You're not going to find them out in the wild. And instead, they're just going to be farmed. They're going to be the genetically altered farmed tuna and salmon. And we're not going to be so happy about that. On the other side of that, you can see that McDonald's advertises that their fish fillet is wild-caught Alaskan pollock. So there's a story of the Alaskan pollock. It's a fish, and it lives near Alaska. It used to be that the United States and Japan and Russia would all come off over to the area around Alaska and catch all these fish. And they were running out. The Alaskan pollock was dying off. It was a big problem. So the United States pushed its sea border out to 200 miles. We used to say you can't fish within 1,200 miles of our border. Now we say you can't fish within 200 miles of our border. So that gets rid of the Russian and the Japanese fishermen, unless they're cheating. We get rid of the Russian and Japanese fishermen. Then, somehow, and I would really like to see how we do this, because I imagine a guy in a boat sitting there going, 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, blue fish. But we count the fishes. So every year they kind of count the salmon, the pollock. I have no idea how they do this, but they count the pollock. And then they say to the fisher people, go fish. But once you take 15% of the fish out of the ocean, you're done, and we're not going to let you fish anymore. Okay? We have gone from the Alaskan pollock being about to disappear to there being billions of pounds of pollock pulled out of the ocean every year. And it's possible, if we don't screw it up, that is a sustainable population. And we can pull a lot of fish out of the ocean every year and be able to do that on a continual basis. But it took what? It took everybody working together. It took the fishermen and the U.S. government to work together to solve the problem. Okay? So England used to be covered by forests. England's not covered by hardly any forests anymore. There's very few forests in England. Why? Well, everybody who lived in a little village would go out and they would cut down trees to build their house and to run their fireplace, and pretty soon, no trees. Right? Same deal as Alaska's fish. Same deal. There are, all over the coast of Africa and Southeast Asia, there are villages that used to be fishing villages, and they're not fishing villages anymore because they overfished and they got rid of them. Okay? How do we stop this? Well, assign property rights is one way. In England, it's hard to do with fish, right? How do I decide that fish belongs to me? That's my fish? Yeah, no. But trees, okay, there actually are a couple of big-sized forests in England, and there's a huge forest on that crosses the border between Poland and Ukraine. There's these forests out there in Europe that still exist. And it turns out that where these forests are, where rich people owned the land, and they kept it for hunting purposes. So you have these old, from hundreds of years ago, these old hunting ranges that they preserved, and that's where the trees are. And how did that happen? Well, They're my trees. You can't cut down my trees. You can go cut down those trees on the public land. Who cares? But you can't cut down my trees. And hundreds of years later, because there were these property rights assigned, those trees are still there. Okay? The other option is kind of like the cap and trade, where you give everybody in town a bunch of cards, and you can cut down one tree for every card you have. So we don't cut down too many trees. If I don't need my trees, I can sell my extra trees to somebody else. Okay? But somehow you have to work together. The way you solve these common property problems is everybody has to work together. And the market historically is not really good at that, because there's an advantage to cheating. Whatever deal we come up with, there's an advantage to the cheaters. All right. So positive externalities. Positive externalities. There's a couple of obvious positive externalities. We talk about the fact that education is a positive externality all the time. This is where Adam Smith talked about externalities. Right? He recognized that the benefit to society of an education is bigger than the benefit to you. When we educate someone to be an accountant at UNLV, accounting firms do not have to train that person. They can hire a trained person. It's to the advantage of the accounting firm. Society's better off. When we have an educated labor force, or educated voters, right? Studies show that the more educated you are, the less likely you are to believe fake news that appears on TV. The more questions you ask about things you're told and about what you see. Okay? So we have questions, though. Is the education system efficient? Well, we all agree, no. It's not very good as a whole. Our education system is not very good. It's not very efficient. Okay? Is it better if it's done in the marketplace? Well, there are a lot of... So, how do you do that, right? Do you privatize every school? Even Adam Smith thought that you needed to have public education, that you needed to have publicly funded education, that it wouldn't work as well. So, people talk about charter schools and how charter schools are better. The record in Nevada is that charter schools are not better than public schools. Okay? And the problem that you have Nevada tried to set up a voucher system and it got thrown out of court. The problem with it's not that we didn't talk about what a voucher system is. A voucher system says the state spends, $8,000 a year educating your child. So the state gives you a certificate for that $8,000, and you can give it to whatever school you want. So you can give it to your local public school, you can give it to a private school, you can give it to whoever school you want, and that's where your kid goes. Okay? On the surface, that sounds really good. Okay? But what happens, and especially the way Nevada split it up, and I'm not going to go in detail into that, but what happens often is that rich people who can take their kids anywhere in town to the school, they can drive them there, education of their child is a top priority, they're planning on their kid going to college, blah, 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 blah. The vouchers end up leaving the public schools full of special needs students and lower income students who cost more than the $8,000. Meanwhile, the rich casino owner's kid is got an $8,000 discount to go to private school. Okay? Most economists agree that you can set up a voucher system that could work. And the idea is that if your neighborhood school is really bad, everybody can go somewhere else. Okay? And then what does your neighborhood school do? They've got no students. Okay? What does the Clark County School District do if nobody wants to go to this particular school? Well, then it's got to change, right? It's got to prove, it's got to do something to convince you that you want to come there. But that's not typically what happens. The low-income folks and the special need folks that live in that neighborhood keep going to that school where the more well-to-do students bail. Right? So we don't really know the answer here. We need to figure out how to make school systems more efficient. We need to make universities more efficient. Universities are incredibly inefficient little beasts. We need to figure those things out. We need to figure a way. Remember, the Constitution says equal protection under the law. Everybody is entitled to an equal education. Everybody who lives in Las Vegas, they need to have the opportunity to get an equal quality education. And the system is supposed to create that. And there's the Nevada plan, and there's all this stuff to try to make that happen, but we fail miserably at it. Right? And everybody agrees. There's a positive externality in education. We need to expand that. And that means we need to make the schools better. Okay? The same thing applies in a simpler way to building parks. We don't have enough parks in Southern Nevada. Why not? Well, building a park is a positive externality. If somebody builds a park across the street from my house, I benefit from that park. Right? I get that positive externality. What should happen is that we require people, when they build a new housing development, to build parks and build open spaces and build these things, and then the homeowners have to pay. And there's lots of states where the homeowners who buy into a new housing community have to pay to build the schools, pay to put in the parks, and they put all this stuff in, and there's lots of positive externalities that are generated by having the schools and the parks and all this stuff. But somebody's got to pay for it. And the people who pay for it need to be the people who benefit from it. Okay? So we don't have enough parks. We underproduce education and we underproduce parks. When there's a positive externality, the market doesn't produce enough of it. When there's a negative externality, we produce too much. When there's a positive externality, we produce too little. So we don't produce enough education. We don't make enough parks. And we could make society much better off if we would fix education and fix parks and fix this kind of stuff that generates these positive externalities. Okay, economics is exciting, isn't it? Yeah, so let's go talk about something else that's exciting.